It's time for the chip race.
For strategy this week, we welcome back to the show a cash game beast who's also got 4.2 million in live tournament winnings. He is also a poker coach, a staker, and the founder of the Solve for Why Academy. He is Matt Berkey. Matt, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you back, Matt. Let's get to this hand. It comes from Live at the Bike, and it's a 7-handed cash game between you and Garrett Adelstein and many other people, but you guys are the hero and villain. You have $235,000 in your stack, and Adelstein has only slightly less, roughly $232K. The other players at the table have stacks ranging from $70K to about $200K. Playing 100-200 with the 200 big blind ante, Garrett raises to $600 under the gun +1 with the 10-9 of diamonds. You make it a chunky 3-bet from the button, bumping it up to 3,000 with the Jack-8 of clubs. Garrett calls. Matt, in position, this is a large 3-bet sizing. Is that a function of the stack depth? You are effectively 1,160 BBs deep with Garrett in this hand.
I mean, it's a mistake for sure. But this hand was also 3 years ago, so I knew a little bit less then than I do now. Large sizings were, and they still are, a big part of my MO, especially playing 1,000 blinds deep. So when you start to add trashy hands to a 3-bet range like this, I would use a little bit more polar sizings whenever I am at like top and bottom, and then utilize more of like the 1,800 to 2K size with more of the linear range. Now, that's not to say that like I would never have aces or kings at the 1,800 or 2K size. And it's not to say that I would never have tens at the 3K size, but it's just a lot less likely. So I do think that I was probably operating with two sizes, and Jack-8 suited isn't a 3-bet at all. It's probably a 0% BPIP. But given how deep we were and the fact that Garrett and I do battle and kind of take it to the streets a little bit, I think whenever we're 1,000 blinds deep in a cash game like this, you can kind of throw a little bit of the theory out of the window. These spots aren't very easy to solve. All we really know is that like stack off thresholds go way, 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 way up, right? Like you effectively just have to have the nuts to stack off 1,000 blinds. But there's a lot of things that happen in between that are fascinating and leave a lot of room for creativity, and also just like a lot of room for margin of error based off of whether or not you're the aggressor.
Well, let's get to the flop, because that's certainly where the hand becomes even more interesting. The pot is 6,500. It comes the Jack of Hearts, 8 of Diamonds, 2 of Hearts. Garrett checks, and you bet 7K with top 2 pair, a small overbet of the pot. Open-ended with a backdoor flush draw, Garrett calls. Dara, I know you ran this hand, and I joke with you that running a hand this deep might break both PO and your computer. I think you told me ahead of this hand that it had been running all night and it was still not at anything close to 100% accuracy. How complicated is it to process hands like this? Matt obviously indicated that these are hard to solve.
Yeah, I mean, the stack to pot ratio is 30. So that's the first thing. There's a lot of complexity to the post flop. There's a lot of different sizings you can use. The one thing that kind of makes this anyway soluble is that the pre-flop ranges are reasonably tight. Like there's a big difference between this and a single raise pot where the stack to pot ratio is 30. But yeah, if it sounds like I had a helicopter in the background until now, it's because I left the solve running literally right until now. The other thing is obviously Matt alluded to the fact that Jack-8 suited probably isn't a 3-bet at any frequency when both players are playing in inverted commas GTO. I think that's true. I mean, it's the right type of hand that we can add if we're going to add some hands. So I kind of made some adjustment to what I thought the GTO ranges were to what I would call the BTO ranges, the Berkey ranges.
Nice. Well, Matt, one of the benefits of putting a hand like this into your 3-bet range is that it is one that your opponent may heavily discount, although you did say you guys battle, so maybe he doesn't discount it too much. It hopefully is well disguised when you hit a monster flop. I appreciate that he could be super wide too here. How are you ranging Garrett, and what are you trying to accomplish with this pot plus bet?
So I think Garrett's very similar to me in the sense that he's quite sticky. Given my obnoxious pre-flop size, he should be probably overfolding quite a bit pre and have a relatively tight range here, maybe even including like up to queens and kings at some frequency. But I just know Garrett to be different. I know him to be not by the book in these particular situations. Like if this were Ralph Wong instead, making a 3K is just such an egregious mistake, because I'm going to get called by like largely what looks like a 4-bet range. It's going to be like ace queen, some ace king, pairs that are like eights plus, and then some traps. But with Garrett, I know that he's probably just continuing with the vast majority of hands that would call a 3-bet regardless of the large size. So he'll probably just treat this as though I 3x'd instead of 5x'd, which means he's going to be relatively linear. He's going to have a lot of suited connectors. He may even have some suited one-gappers just because it's us and we do these things from time to time. But I do expect him to have like pairs plus, some suited aces, broadways, and some suited connectors.
Very good. Well, to the turn, the pot is 20,500. It comes to 3 of diamonds. So the board now reads Jack of hearts, 8 of diamonds, 2 of hearts, 3 of diamonds. This is a great card for Garrett as he adds a flush draw to his open ender. Again, he checks, and this time you go very big, betting 30k, almost 150% of the pot. Garrett calls. The 3 of diamonds is unlikely to make or improve a hand directly, but it can add some equity to either of your ranges, as it has in Garrett's case now. Dara, Matt's sizing here applies a lot of pressure to Garrett's range. Matt can be somewhat confident he's not up against a set because of card removal. So he's really charging the draws and maybe the ace jacks, king jacks type of hands. For that reason, do you like his overbet sizing?
Yeah, I do like the overbet sizing on this street. The interesting thing for me when I ran this in PO, and again, put all the usual caveats about it depends on the ranges, and I may have got those off, but PO didn't want to do any overbetting on the flop. It pretty much just used a small size with its range, including Matt's hand. But if we get to the turn in this way, it does go ahead and overbet at this point. I think, the reasons you alluded to there are all good reasons to overbet.
Well, Matt, when Garrett calls, he has to have something. And like we said, it's probably a hand with some okay equity, a pair and flush draw, a combo draw. Best case scenario for you is obviously the ace jack and the sticky king jack that I mentioned. Your bet's obviously very polar. So from his point of view, raising becomes less appealing to calling. On the flip side of that coin, though, his hand has no showdown and he's out of position. So it is the type of hand that does like to create 2 ways to win, getting you to fold with a big raise and I suppose getting there as a plan B. Do you like his decision to call?
Yeah, these spots get a little bit weird, right? Because you're just not going to win with 10 high out of position and you don't really have much opportunity to bluff. But given the SPR, it's an absolute nightmare to check raise and get shoved on. Secondary to that, even if he gets the best case scenario, which is that I just call, it's probable that I have a hand that is bluff catching and capable of calling twice. Now, of course, my single pair hands aren't going to perform all that well through this line, which is why Dara is finding that PO doesn't want to overbet the flop, right? Because there's a big chunk of my range that just doesn't perform all that well given SPR and what the actual stack off threshold is, for me to just start bombing away with like queens through aces. So they're just going to do a little bit better from the small size. The thing is, though, on this board texture, a lot of Garrett's continues, regardless of the size that I choose on the flop, are rather inelastic. A jack is pretty much calling all sizes, as is 9-10, as are flush draws and pair plus draw type things. The challenge as the aggressor is figuring out what hands he chooses to raise. And when you go small, coincidentally, you actually might create some more problem sets for your bigger hands, in the sense that you just get funneled into bluff catching multiple streets on a texture that's going to change. Whereas like in reality, I probably would have chosen that large size with overpairs as well to check back the turn and ultimately play like a medium sized pot. So when I overbet turn, I am very polar in nature, and it puts him in a weird spot because he's dominated by my draws and my showdown value is just probably pretty nutted. So raising becomes, I think, a lot less appealing. We're still deep enough going into the river that he could potentially check shove. And I think that that's probably the most viable way to win unimproved, should he choose to try to win this hand with 10 high.
Yeah, Matt gave the reasons there why raising the turn is kind of problematic, and PO is in complete agreement. PO just plays it as a pure call. It folds all the other 10-9s, which don't have the flush draw, but obviously we have a ton of equity here with the flush draw as well.
Indeed. Well, to the river, the pot is now 80,500 and it comes the 9 of spades. So the final board is Jack of hearts, 8 of diamonds, 2 of hearts, 3 of diamonds, 9 of spades. Garrett has made a pair there, obviously. He checks and you bet 46,700, 58% of pot. Now, most of the draws have missed. Only Queen 10 and 10-7 of diamonds and hearts got there. And I don't think we can really put 10-7 in there too much from him. This card will have made a decent number of those draws a pair, and of course the sticky ace-jack and king-jack suited are still possible. That makes your choice of value sizing really good, actually, I think. Dara, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think the sizing is pretty much spot on in this point, and it puts Garrett in the position where he has a bluff catcher and actually a very, very difficult decision. You can make an argument for all three options, I think, here in his seat. You can maybe just about call. You can certainly fold, which he, of course, ended up doing, or you can decide to turn your pair and your somewhat decent blockers into a raise. And just looking over my shoulder at the solver very quickly, the solver does actually do all three options. So that shows that we've chosen a good size, which makes him indifferent.
And how often does it do each?
The solver goes ahead and raises 15%, calls 10%, and folds the remaining 75%.
That's interesting. Matt, the aspect of this hand that I am curious about is, was Adelstein tanking a call or was he tanking a raise? It was probably both, because I imagine a player like him playing a player like you is thinking about all the options, really. In the end, he let it go, as Dara said there, but what would you have done if he shoved?
I intended to call. I recognize once the board texture changes in a dynamic manner like that on the river, after big bet sizes come through, we have to be a lot more cognizant of what portion of the range we're attempting to get to call. So we're at like 2.5 SPR on the river. If I go full pot there or pot plus, sure, my hand is strong enough to beat a lot of Garrett's range that landed this far, but it can't call, right? So if he has ace jack, he should just probably be folding at this point. I mean, I guess maybe it mixes, but the point that I'm trying to get to is we're way beyond the equity thresholds, given how large this pot has swollen to, for like his single pair hands to be heroing off unless they have pretty strong removal. Like 9-10 is probably a better call than ace jack, I would guess. I think that he was probably only considering one or the other options. Not that he doesn't recognize his hand could do either, but just more so that in live, you're going to be swayed one way or the other pretty heavily based on your opponent. And it's really difficult to split that line of thinking in one singular decision point, right? So if he arrives at that spot and he just immediately recognizes like, okay, low frequency, my hand calls and my hand raises, but I'm dealing with Berkey who just went overbet, half pot. What does that mean? It's almost certain that he's just going to shift his mindset between folding and calling or folding and raising so that he can put a singular focus on what would sway him away from the fold, basically. I actually think his hand is a really good candidate to shove because I probably don't overbet a hand like queen 10 of hearts on the turn. So now blocking queen 10 of diamonds seems really, really critical. I think like 9-10 of hearts probably serves as a better call or a fold, and 9-10 of diamonds, if we're like really scrutinizing here, probably serves him a little bit better as a shove. I did plan on calling, but honestly, like even after the fact, knowing that I had the best hand and that I played the hand the way I wanted to potentially induce that shove, I'm kind of glad he didn't, because even though my mind was made up, when you're just in the moment, you know, things sometimes get a little hazy and you just can't believe that someone could pull that trigger, even though like I know Garrett's capable.
Well, Dara, I'm conscious to give you maybe the final word here. That solver obviously put in an overnight shift last night. Did you, within the game tree, analyse, you know, maybe what Berkey should do if shoved upon there? Is his hand just too strong, and the fact that he's gone for the small sizing opens the door for the raise, so he kind of has made his bed once he goes that way?
Well, actually, I mean, this is one of the spots where sort of blockers matter more than anything else. The way PO will consider it is like what's being represented here and how well do we block that. So it actually thinks that this is pretty much a snap call. It's making 10% of the pot. But for example, it will fold a set of eights here.
Wow.
Eights is a worse call.
That kind of makes some sense to me. Again, stack off threshold should be so high whenever we are this deep, and we just get overset a lot whenever we have pocket eights. But when we have jack eight, that's not really too much of a concern.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's a cool heuristic. Well, a fascinating hand. It's rare we ever look at a super deep hand, let alone one that the player started over 1,000 big blinds deep. Matt Berkey, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for breaking the machine.